So it appears to some of the people I talk to that CPS is a problem in Idaho. Like civil asset forfeiture, children are taken from parents who have to prove they're not guilty of claims from caseworkers who could be lying about their situations. What reforms, if any, do you or would you propose for child protective services under the Department of Health and Welfare? And I'm starting with Senator Herndon. What do you need for that? That's like a minute? 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
It's fine.
Every year, the Department of Health and Welfare, which operates Child Protective Services, they take a lot of federal money, so CPS and all the different states looks about the same. Every year in Idaho, the department takes about 1,300 children out of their homes. And a lot of what's happening right now, they don't even have the funding or places to put them, so they're actually housing some children in Airbnbs. And there is even allegations that there's sexual misconduct happening with the people supervising at those Airbnbs. That's what's going on in the state of Idaho. So what we've done in the past few years, we got 2 bills passed just in the 2 sessions that I've been in. Last year, I passed a bill, House Bill 66, that made it a crime to falsely report child abuse. If you call in a false report and you know it's false, and this happens, people weaponize CPS against each other, especially in divorces and when there's conflict between married people. We made that a crime in Idaho last year. This year, we have required that, and it passed after 4 years of trying this, the Department of Health and Welfare, CPS workers, are now going to give a written communication to all the parents that they investigate. And that's over 9,000 families a year in the state of Idaho, where a CPS worker shows up at your door, and now they're going to give you a notification of what your constitutional rights are, which includes your right to have an attorney present, to refuse entry to your home, to not answer any questions, and refuse their ability to talk to your children. That will keep parents' rights intact. It also still allows for children to be safe, because a law enforcement officer, if they have probable cause with exigent circumstances, they can still overcome and make sure that child is safe. Or you can go to a court and get a warrant to still ensure the safety of that child. Moving forward, I'd like to change who is a mandatory reporter in the state of Idaho, and there's a number of other things that we're going to be attempting. And so we do have an agenda, and I think we're making some progress on reforming CPS.
Seeing that the Idaho legislature does oversee the administration of state agencies, I think that this is one agency that needs to be picked apart and investigated for the things they're doing. If kids are staying in Airbnbs and there's rumor or even proof of abuse of any kind, that needs to be looked into. Whether it's a committee, whether it's just whoever would take that upon themselves to look into that. I think they really need to have oversight, and also not their budgets increased, but have their budgets tightened if they've got if they're doing these kinds of things.
So I don't know if Idaho does this, but I know in other states, and Scott can throw something at me if I'm wrong, but in a lot of states, CPS actually gets paid for taking the kids. So they take X number of kids, and every kid they take, they get something, federal money put in their budget. So they're incentivized to go take the kids. So that's got to stop. I mean, they cannot possibly, I mean, what world do we live in where there's a financial incentive for somebody to come take your kid? Because everything's always about money, right? It always has to go back to money. So we have these departments that are getting funded based on how many kids they take. So what do? They go take kids. So that has to stop. And people reporting stuff falsely, if you report something falsely and you get somebody's kid taken away, man, you got to go to jail for that. That is so wrong. So we have to stop people from falsely making reports. We have to stop these, I think we had a few workers in Idaho, CPS workers, who had chips on their shoulders and were taking kids just because they didn't like the interaction they had with the parents. No, you go up to somebody's door, something gets reported, and the parent stands on their rights and says, no, you're not allowed in my house. And then there's some abrasion there, and then it becomes the state worker's job now. It's like their goal to take this person's kid, no matter what. They just want to prove they're more powerful than you. Well, stuff like that can't happen. People that do those things should be fired. People that are reporting these things falsely should go to jail, and we shouldn't be incentivizing CPS to take people's kids.
So there's not much I can add to that. But I would like to see, how many of you have heard of VAERS, the vaccine event? Yeah, okay. I would like to see something called CPS, Child Protective Adverse Event Reporting System, and I'd like to see it overseen by the state, and I'd like to see it audited by a citizens committee so that we have and I want it to be a lot easier to report on than VAERS is. You need a degree in psychology to report on VAERS. So those are some of the things that have been going through my head, because when we homeschooled way back decades ago when it was tinfoil hat stuff. And one of the things that my wife and I thought about at the time was, what if somebody turns us in? Could we lose our children? So we kept file cabinets full of their progress, their testing on our own. And we also, well, this would take too much time. And I don't want to bore you with a story about the superintendent of schools back then. This was like 40 years ago. And this stuff is not new. This stuff has been happening since the bite in the apple.
So I'll agree, we need to do everything to protect children in difficult circumstances like that. We had an organization here who had a group home, but because their dependence on federal monies, and other organizations in other states that were actually, because children with emotional behavioral issues were graded on a certain level, and if they were so high, you got a lot of money, and if they were really low and could be adopted out, you didn't get as much. And certain organizations were actually letting kids get worse and worse and worse, and then getting more money. So that federal money stopped because they required organizations, group homes, to have licensed therapists and care workers, which our organization didn't want to do. They just wanted to take care of local kids so they could stay connected to their community, and when their issues were resolved, they could get reconnected to their families. And so we need to look at empowering local organizations to be able to provide a safe, secure care facility so that those children who are in very bad circumstances can have a safe place to work things out and still be connected to their community.
Thank you. So if anybody needs 30 seconds more, if there's something you left out or something you'd like to add.
I'll just add, just so you know a little bit about the money, child welfare in the state of Idaho, that includes foster care and CPS, is $113 million a year, and 64% of that is federal money. So that's where you get those federal requirements that get tied into it. Now, we live in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in federal courts, and it's the most liberal circuit that there is probably in the United States. But interestingly enough, they're one of the best circuits when it comes to child protection and the rights of parents, and that children are better off staying in their family home. And they actually use a book called Storming the Castle to Save the Children. It's an expert who's written how it's actually more harmful to a child to be taken by the state than to suffer some minor abuse at home.